Welcome to School Story, where every school has a story waiting to be told. Join us, two seasoned school administrators, as we delve into the heart of educational experiences. Each episode is a journey through the dynamic world of schooling, where we uncover the triumphs, challenges, and untold narratives that shape the lives of students, teachers, and communities.
We discuss Kids These Days by Jody Carrington. It's a phenomenal book about the kids who sometimes seem to be unreachable and sometimes who adults blame for the problems that they're having. As we dive into the book, we learn a lot more about where kids are at, where they're going, and what we can do as adults to help them get to where they need to go.
Jody Carrington, she's a child psychologist. She said that her book is for those who work in educational settings, whether they're teachers, bus drivers, administrators, educational assistants, librarians, secretaries, and custodians. It's also for anyone who leads, loves, and supports them. If you have a kid, work with a kid, or love a kid, you will find something inspiring in the pages, even possibly game-changing. And for our 5-star rating of this book, my rating is an actual 5 full 5 stars, because, like she said, there is something that is game-changing, and there were many times throughout the book I was marking and I was highlighting that led to conversations and ways that changed how I not only taught and interacted with my students, but also how I interacted with my own kids.
I agree with Stuart. This is a 5-star book in my opinion. And the way that this podcast will be set up is we'll have an introduction to the book. We'll give it a 5-star rating. Then we will give 3 kind of actionable items that you can use tomorrow. And then we'll give a brief summary of the book. And so 3 things that I think are actionable for tomorrow, whether in the classroom or in the home or whatever situation you work with kids, are the following. The first actionable step I think that we need to make as educators is that we need to make eye contact with every student every day and greet them. Whether you are a principal, assistant principal, or a teacher standing at the door, every student needs to be called by name and have eye contact made with them. We'll talk more about what that means when we get into the book, but essentially you'll have a look into their soul and kind of where they're at that day and how you can help them. Number 2, I think the important thing to do is to check in on your kids or your students every day to see whether their tank is half full, half empty, running on fumes, or completely full and they're ready to go. You can do this through a bunch of different ways, whether you're just asking students, but just gauging where they're at. As an adult leader in the building, I think it's also a great way to engage with other adults in the building, is to find out where their gas tank is every day. The third thing, this is going to be extremely difficult for those of you that have lots of kids, is to spend
7 kids.
I know, it's a lot. I was actually calculating that out. The actionable thing for parents is to spend 10 to 15 minutes of unstructured time with each of your children every day. No tech, whether that's planning, learning, cooking, talking, drawing, serving, it doesn't matter what that is, but it has to be unstructured and you have to be doing something together. This isn't the kid on his phone on the other side of the couch and then you on your phone on the other side of the couch. This is both of you doing something together, unstructured.
Yeah, my 3 takeaways. The first one was proximity. She said that we've actually got it better than most everyone in the past, except for one thing, proximity. They were used to living in a small house, and she brought up how people are texting their kids to tell them to come to dinner. And I have never done that before, or used Alexa to make announcements throughout the house saying, get your butts down here, it's time to eat. So proximity was an interesting concept for me. It almost made me want to move out of my house and try and find the smallest house I could find. I was trying to talk my wife into a tiny home and she wasn't going for it. And in reality, it would be tough. But proximity is one of the things that she brought up. Proximity with your kids, proximity with those that you live with and those that are important to you. The second thing was lid flipping kids. It was an interesting concept for me because especially having younger kids and working with younger kids at times, when they flip their lid is a concept she talks about. She gives concrete steps of what to do to help bring them back. And the fact that they're flipping their lid is actually a good thing that they're doing it in your presence. And the third thing can be applied either at the school or at home. It's just a culture of connection. What are you doing to build it? What are you doing to facilitate it? And is it something that you're conscious about?
Awesome. One of the things that she talks about in chapter one, as we move kind of into the chapters and kind of the meat of the book, is this idea of emotional regulation. I think there's, especially in this political climate, right, with CRT and social emotional learning and all of these things, is really what it's about is helping younger kids, actually all kids, not just younger kids, recognize, identify, name, and manage their emotions. That's what this all comes back to, right? Is we have a lot of kids who feel these emotions, they don't know what it's called. And so we need to give them a voice so they kind of explain, they can kind of talk through what that emotion is. And then once we as adults learn what that emotion is, we can help them regulate it. What's interesting is that I found in her book is sometimes even as adults, we still haven't figured out how to regulate our emotion. And so it's really difficult for us to teach kids, and I'm saying that from firsthand experience. I have a short temper, and it comes, and I'm seeing it now in my kids because I haven't figured out how to regulate my emotions. They are kind of practicing what they're seeing, and so with my younger kids, I'm doing a lot more purposeful practice with them, whether it's counting back or square breathing or other things that I've learned as I've gone through education. I'm helping them kind of learn that.
It's hard to teach something when you don't have it yourself.
Right.
Something she brings up.
Right. And that's, I mean, there's hundreds of parents and tons of administrators out there that, and teachers, right, that just say, well, you shouldn't do this. Well, what should I do instead? Some students, and we assume, I think as educators, that students should have been taught this already. But what we're learning more and more and more, right, those of you that work in education, is that we have to teach the kids how we want them to behave, both in the classroom, out of the classroom, with their peers, with adults. The thing that I love, right, is she talks about how the kids aren't the problem. They never have been the problem. It's about being disconnected. And when she talks about it, it's not only the current generation of kids. I think that every generation prior to us has had a moment of disconnectivity with the generation before them.
And their dang music, that rock and roll.
No, I know it sounds kind of like get off my yard kind of thing, but I think every generation has had a moment of disconnectedness, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what was going on in the 60s with the war and different things. People were like, no, we don't want this to happen, right? This is what's going on in the 80s and 90s with TV and music and all those things. And now it's just, social media and tech and other things like that. So it's just every generation will have their disconnectedness, I guess.
Well, and I think that's where the title comes from too, is the kids these days, every single generation, there's been something that the older generation has been frustrated that the younger generation has done. And it's just changed, whether it's been internet phones or Walkmans and iPods or whatever the younger generations was using. It's just different every generation, but it's still there.
Okay, so jumping into chapter 2, right, is taming the crazy by getting crazier. Why don't you kick us off and kind of go through what your thoughts were?
Yeah. And one final thing about chapter 1 that I really liked is she talked about it, and it's something that I've started implementing with mine and I've talked with others, is she talks about how we often ask kids in the classroom to apologize and to be calm and to use those nice words. And we punish them when they don't. But if they've never seen someone, stay calm, use those nice words and apologize. They're not going to be able to do it because they haven't seen it. And like you brought up, I see my kids, they're mini me's at times where they're using what they see to interact with their siblings and with others. And it's something that is a good reflection point at times, because you realize, do I really sound like that? Do I really talk that? Do I really say that? And so that's been one of the interesting parts as I've read through this book, is the re-emphasizing of those points. Moving on, taming the crazy by getting crazy. I loved the second part. Chapter 2 for me was probably my favorite chapter. She covered so many important things that for me, I just found myself coming back to time and time again as my favorites and my things that I felt were the most important. One thing she talks about is you can't take away enough things from kids to make them be kind. And as a parent, it's something that I've had to think about. And as an educator, right? Am I going to suspend that kid, or am I going to send them to timeout? What am I doing to take things away so that they're going to be kind all of a sudden. Also the co-regulation. I've got to help my kids, and also I've got to help my students understand what it means to regulate their emotions, because as the adult, hopefully we have some of that. We have some of that experience. We have some of that knowledge that we can tap into to help them understand this is how you figure out your emotions. This is what you do. This is what it looks like to regulate your emotions. Now, you're not using those terms. You're not talking all professional with them. You're getting down on their level and you're talking to them to make sure that they understand.
Right. I like that. I mean, I like this too. You talk about co-regulating, right? It's a partnership between, the adult and the relationship, the kid and the relationship. And this is any kid. This is elementary, middle, high school, college age student, is to work with them together. And that's one of the differences, I think, for me, with my older kids and my younger kids. Is my older kids, I just said, hey, I've said this you need to figure it out. Well, I literally just told them, you go figure out your own way. And so they're going to go figure out their own way how to regulate. With my younger kids and my older kids now that I'm learning more, is to kind of talk through them with this. Like, how are you feeling about this? A great example of this is, I have a ninth grade student who's going to be a sophomore, and he's been an SBO for 3 years, and he ran again to be at the high school. And it's a really big deal in the high school. It completely changes levels, right?
Yep.
And he didn't win, and he was super bummed about it. And it was like, it affected the whole mood in our house. And I think prior to, a lot of the things that I've experienced both as an educator, and a parent, I would have just said, hey, it's okay, we'll get them next time, right? But it was multiple conversations, not only with me, but my spouse and him, and kind of like saying, hey, let's walk through this. What are your concerns about it? And not that it's any better, right? I mean, he's still lost. He's not going to be the SBO, right? But it's how to regulate things. Okay, what else can you get involved in at the school? Why do you feel like, and we were even prepping beforehand because we knew it was such a big deal, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
it's competitive.
It is.
Yeah.
Like, what happens if you lose? What's your backup plan?
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, oh, well, you'll get him next year. And that's kind of like how my parents raised us, is it was just like, just figure it out, right? There wasn't any kind of partnership at all.
Yeah.
That's because they didn't know any better for the most part. So,
well, and one thing that she brought up that was exactly what you're talking about is, as an infant, we spend a lot of time helping them figure out what's going on and basically solving the problem for them. But as they get older, we stop doing that for them, especially because they start saying hurtful things. And when they start saying those hurtful things, our tendency is just to walk away and let them figure it out, or send them to their rooms, where she talks about the fact that once they start saying those hurtful things, instead of the natural inclination, especially as an educator and as a parent, as a father, is I've got to teach them to be respectful. That's not how you talk to an adult. But instead of thinking of it that way, because we're letting our desire to teach them respect trump the aspect of helping them sort out the problem. And if you're doing that throughout their life, right, as they get older, hopefully they're able to figure out those bigger problems. And even though it may have been really hurtful what they said, and they always know what to say. They always know the button to push to make it the absolute worst comeback. It's to take that aside, stay bigger and stronger, and help them figure out the problem.
So the other thing that you mentioned, right, too, with this one, and we've spending quite a bit of time on chapter 2, the idea of having a secure relationship, right? I think as an educator, we have all been, well, we hopefully, you've been a student's favorite teacher, right? And you can see it in the way that when they come into class every day, and sometimes it doesn't take that much, right? And it's interesting, when I worked in, I taught ninth grade, there's a transition right there that's happening between 8th, 9th, and 10th and 11th grade, right? Where they're becoming kind of their own voice. And as a language arts teacher, it was fun to kind of watch kids get their own voice that was different from their parents, right? So usually when you would have these kind of arguments in 7th and 6th grade, it was just kids repeating what they heard at their house, right? But as they get older, they start to develop their own opinions and their own stuff. And so they get their own voice. And I think it's important to listen to that voice. And she talks about that, again, it's like, let them tell you how things are going. don't just assume that you know how it's going.
Yeah.
So do we want to bring up ACEs here at this point? I mean, I think it's important.
We can.
Well, there's a huge study, and I can't remember who did the study. I have it marked in my book. I don't have the book right in front of me. But it's basically adverse child experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so they, did this study, and we'll link it below. You can find it. It's attached with the book. But essentially, if a student has, or a kid, a person has 4 or more of these events happen to them, it's almost like they're going to end up on this kind of, I don't want to say wrong path, right? Because everybody has a different path, but this path that has more conflict, more problems, whether that's alcoholism, divorce, drug, addiction, like all, other addictions, different things like that.
3 times more likely to be a smoker, 6 times more likely to have unplanned pregnancy, 7 times more likely to be involved in violence in the last year, 11 times more likely to have used heroin, crack, or been incarcerated, and 18 times more likely to attempt suicide.
So if you're a parent or a teacher and you're looking at this book and we give you this list of all these things and you're like, well, what's going to cause these things? The list is actually very, very small. Stuart, do you have that in front of you? The actual ACEs quiz? I think there's 8 things on it, right?
Yeah. So they've got a list of things that you can go with. It's physical abuse by a parent, emotional abuse by a parent, sexual abuse by anyone, growing up with an alcohol and or drug abuser in the household, experiencing the incarceration of a household member, living with a family member experiencing mental illness, domestic violence, loss of a parent, emotional neglect, and physical neglect.
So it's funny is the wrong word, right? It's actually devastating when you look at that list, because so if a child has 4 or more of these, they're 16 times more likely to be X.
Yeah.
Well, so then what that means, right, is that's why you see generational problems, because that's all they know, right? Whether it's sexual abuse or drug abuse or mental illness, substance abuse, that's why, as educators, we see things happen, and then you look at parents and it's like, well, no wonder. And then it's going to continue. It takes a lot to break that cycle. And I mean, those numbers are heartbreaking. But there are ways that she talks about specifically, and I don't know if we want to jump in straight to chapter 6, right? I mean, the heavy stuff is kind of in 4 or 5 that talks about ACEs and that quiz, and trauma,
grief,
and then grief that comes along with that. I don't necessarily think we should focus on the negative parts, but we have to recognize that they exist, and you can see them in your students every day when they come in your building, and you might even be able to see them in your own kids. What is the answer to get over those things?
Yeah, and what she talked about a lot, something that I went out and started researching as well when she brought it up, was the circle of security. Because she's a practicing therapist, psychologist, and she talked about how difficult it was to have some of these hard conversations with parents, because parents took it as, oh, I'm the problem, I'm the cause, I'm the reason for it. And what she found is that discussing it through the circle of security, which it basically has 2 hands on the infographic, and you have the secure base and the safe haven. So it's easy to imagine it with the kid at the playground. When they're young, they don't necessarily want to run away and go play unless they're secure with you and they know you're there to support them. And then when they're out in the playground, and sometimes it drives you crazy. They're like, watch me, dad, look, dad, look. And they're wanting you to watch over them, delight over them, help them, enjoy it with them. But the moment that something happens, that secure base now becomes a safe haven, or it should be. And so they're going to come running back to you because they need you to help co-regulate. They need you to protect them, comfort them, delight them, organize their feelings, help them understand what's going on. And sometimes it's as simple as just kissing the boo-boo they have and then sending them back out to play. Obviously, as they get older, those things change, but that's the basic gist of it, the secure base and the safe haven. They know they can leave from the safe base or the secure base and it's there, but when they need, they can come back to that safe haven. One thing, though, that we need to hit on that she helped is the 30% factor. oftentimes when parents are hearing a lot of these things, she says, I can see them go through and judging themselves. And she said, what we have found in research is that just 30% of the time is good enough. If you can help your kids emotionally regulate 30% of the times, you're good. And so it's like a baseball average. If you're hitting the 300, you're golden, right? That's a great batting average.
It's funny that you should say that, because there's times, and I know that I'm in a unique situation where with 7 kids, that it just happens that way. There's not enough time in the day to. That's a cop out, right? I think maybe, but it's just, there are times when
life happens.
The focus has to be on this child over this child, or this child over this child. And those of you that have different kids, that they have different personalities, and some are okay with this and some are okay with that, and different parenting styles and different things like that. Again, we are not experts and we don't claim to be experts. Nope. That's why originally we kind of started talking about doing this, is to help us be better. Yeah. To be better at this. So the other thing that I think that I don't want to steal this because you have it in your notes, is the field.
Go for it. There's no stealing amongst friends.
No, well, the idea of just so the field, right? It stands for 5 different things, and we can talk about it. So they're all in the matter of the first and last, anyway. So you need to feed them.
Field, not feel.
Field.
Good. There we go. Yeah, got it.
Field.
Sorry to all the listeners that can't understand his Utah accent.
That's true. It's true, and I do tend to mumble sometimes. Feed them is what my wife says. So you need to feed them. You need to show interest that is genuine. And this is kind of the idea of the 10 to 15 minutes every day of doing unstructured time.
Yep.
Eye contact and say their name. It's not just with students, it's with, you as parents. Leave them never, especially when they tell you to go away. I think there are times when, again, as educators and parents, when we do just leave our kids and leave them alone. That's the time most likely when they need us the most.
But it's so hard when they're so angry and so mean.
It's true, which is funny that you say that, because I think it's easier to leave my own kids than it is kids at a school.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of truth to that.
Because they're not your kids, right? I don't know. And the D stands for down on their level is where you want to be. And I think that's important in the sense of,
that almost sounds like a rap song. Down on their level is where I want you to be.
It could be. Yeah. It could be a rap song.
I like it.
We won't sing it, but it could be. So with
maybe
that,
we can get
down on
Vanilla
their
Ice
level,
to do it.
We could do something like that.
Yeah.
Is jumping in, and part of that process, right, is the leave them never. I think it's important, and she talks about this kind of throughout the whole book, is that, the flipping the lids, and I won't spend a ton of time on it because we've already talked about it, but when their lids are flipped, it's a lot easier for the adult's lid to flip. And so there's got to be a time, and I look at it like a roller coaster, right? And I remember doing this with kids when they came into my office. I would draw a roller coaster, right? And something has just happened. I'm like, okay, you're right here. You're at the height of the roller coaster. I cannot talk to you right now because you're super amped up. You're worried about if you're going to get in trouble. You're worried about this. I'm like, I'm going to let you sit here for a minute. I want you to write down what happened. I'll give you 10, 15 minutes or longer, right? And sometimes it was another situation where I would just take the kids down to the gym to play basketball and just cool off. They're still going to have consequences. But having that conversation when their lid is flipped and calling home and having all that stuff, there's got to be a time where you can everybody can go up and come back down.
Well, she brings that up.
Be calm again, right?
She says one of the great myths is you feel like you have to handle it in the moment. If you don't handle it soon enough, then basically they're not going to remember the consequence. Kind of like their dogs is what it reminded me of with my dang dog, as you're trying to teach them to potty train. If you don't catch them while they're peeing, you can't punish them for that puddle 20 minutes later because they're a dog. They're not going to remember. But she said with kids, you can wait till everyone's lid's back on, even if it's a day, especially with your own kids. You can wait a day and then have that conversation with them in order to help them understand that it was a mistake that they did. And that's why she says feed them. In fact, I'm a sucker for lists. Like I'll click on any list that pops up in my feed. And she's got one. She says the 5 keys to reconnection with anyone in your life. And it's basically what you said. Show genuine interest in things they care about first. And for me, that's hard because I hate Minecraft. I hate it. I guess I shouldn't say I hate it. It just doesn't intrigue me as much as my kids do. But I do find myself playing or talking at least about a lot of Minecraft because it's what they love. Get their eyes and say their name. For me, that's hard when you're in a school of 2,500, 3,000 kids. But luckily, when there's a situation in your office with them, you typically know their name by then, and you know what's going on. Get down on their level, especially with smaller kids. When I get down on my 5-year-old's level, it really makes a big difference to him. And then feed him. I've got 3 boys, and I'm not excited for food bills when there are 3 teenage boys because I can only imagine what they eat, and I know you're there. But what she said, and I know sometimes other educators will get frustrated with administrators because they'll say, oh, you just bring them down, you give them a candy bar, or you give them a treat or a drink. And this is probably on us, we need to communicate better. The deal with food is you can't chew and you can't swallow when your lid's flipped. It's biologically impossible, she says. So there's some part of your brain, the limbic system, and she does the thumb with the fingers over the top. Basically, right. You can't swallow and you can't drink and eat when that's out of whack. And so the food and drink is what brings it back. I think there's a reason why when someone's going through something hard, holy cow, the amount of food that shows up at your house, everyone wants to give you food. It's what we use to make sense of hard things. And so it's not really a reward. It's a regulating strategy that we can use with our kids in our building or in our household, even tomorrow. You have a kid flipping a lid, figure out how to make them take a drink of that or eat something.
Well, and it's funny that you talk about this because
I'm a funny guy. That's why
this book was written before what we're currently experiencing with the COVID generation of kids, right? Is the 2020, 2021 year was difficult for certain reasons, but from everybody that I have talked with and spoken with in education is 21, 22 was way more difficult because of the behavior of the kids. And there's lots of different feelings and theories and thoughts about whatever. And we're not here to talk about all of those. We are here to talk about that the reality of it was more difficult. And I think part of it is that culture of connection. You have it highlighted. Do you want to talk about or bolded? Do you want to talk about kind of the culture of connection?
Well, just for me, the reason why I bolded it and highlighted it is because it's something that just really resonated with me. I will be able to speak, I swear. Something that resonated with me because I liked how it flowed, the culture of connection. What is the culture of your school? It's something that I've read a lot of books about the school culture and something I hear a lot about. What is the culture? And if you could build a culture of connection, not just in your school, but in your house, what does it look like? What do you do? How do you build those connections? That was something that was just really intriguing to me.
So I'll ask you, do you have suggestions? So I have what are your suggestions to build a culture of connection?
Sure. Put me on the spot. Food always comes down to food. What can I do? I had a previous boss that was really good. He always had food in his office, always. And one day I asked him about it and he said, it's because people come in, they want the food. And so by them coming in, it was an opportunity for him to have an interaction with them that was hopefully something that was meaningful. What about you? What do you got?
I think one thing I think that she does talk about at the very beginning, you talked about it in the intro, is that everybody that works in the school is there for kids. I've been in schools where
hopefully
there's different levels, quote unquote, right? There's the administration, there's teachers, there's custodial staff, there's, ESPs, there's, different things. But I've also been in cultures where everybody was on the same page, right? So if it was Teacher Appreciation Week, if we were celebrating birthdays, if we had, Pi Day on, March 14th, every single person in the building was invited to come down to celebrate because, I understand that having a classroom of 45 kids is difficult. but cleaning up after those 45 kids is difficult too. But when you put everybody on the same level as far as just celebrations and invitation and making it welcome, it was a huge difference in the school. There wasn't a divide about us versus them or them versus us. And I mean, it was cool to kind of watch that shift over time from one administrator to the next. And so as I've become a principal, it's just everybody's invited to everything. And I know I have a smaller, obviously, staff than most of the schools that Stuart and I work with, but it's a little bit easier to do that way. I think the other really, really important thing about culture of connection is hiring the right people. So when you're hiring people, they need to at least be told and expected and interviewed in the sense of, this is what happened and this is who we are. So when they don't do that, you can go back and say, hey, when we interviewed or when I hired you, you said you were going to be about this. What's going on? How can I help you be about what we, talked about? That's a whole nother thing for another book.
Yeah, absolutely.
So finishing off, she says that kids are the least of our worries. What do you think she means by that?
Well, honestly, it kind of caught me off guard because I wasn't sure where she was going with it. And to have something like that was interesting. And so I was intrigued by where she was going to go with it. But basically it was about, and she's funny because she's Canadian, but she really speaks her mind. And if you haven't heard the Audible version or the audio version, I highly recommend getting the audio version because she reads it herself and you really get her personality in that. And it's phenomenal because she speaks to my heart the way she talks. But she talks about there that if the adults that are interacting with the kids aren't okay, the kids can't be okay. And some interesting points she talked about was there's always been difficult kids in education, and there always will be difficult kids. That's not ever going to change. But what she's heard time and time again is it's not the difficulty, because that's always the same, but it's the frequency. There are just so many more difficult kids than there were before, and the intensity that takes makes it really, really hard to stay that positive connection self, with your students. What about you?
I think the idea of we saw it, right? We've seen it. We've firsthand experience working with educators this past year or two or three, how quickly it's shifted where we've realized that the teachers are not okay, that the educators are not okay. I mean, it's even public perception, right? 2019, the spring of 2019, teachers are superheroes. They're amazing. They put together in 4 or 5 days, basically online schooling, and they figured it out, right?
Yep.
But now, 2.5 years later, at least in our environment where we're at, is not from everybody, and this might be a generalization, but the educators are the enemy because of what's being taught in the classroom and what they're teaching our kids about social emotional learning and about race and about history and about, books and novels. And I had more emails this year about some of the books that our teachers were sharing with our kids than I've ever had previously, which is, funny to me. And I don't, anyway, but I think the part that she talks about is, and this would go specifically to, I think, administrators and parents. If you are not taking care of the adults, right, yourself and your spouse, or you and whoever's taking care of your kids, there's no way that you're going to be able to help them take care of themselves.
Yeah.
As far as what that looks like. And I won't necessarily get into my relationship and marriage and stuff like that, but it's definitely, when something's off, it skews everything, whether it's with me or with my wife or with me or another administrator in the building or with the teacher. The kids can feel it, right? They know when the teacher's coming in, just kind of going through the motions. So,
no, absolutely. And remember earlier when I said I'm a sucker for lists? Well, she's got another list in this chapter. She has the 6 practices to keep you lit for the whole school year. Number 1, bottom hands only. The rest don't score. Basically what that means is, whose opinion do you really value? That's what really matters. Don't listen to all the naysayers. Don't listen to everyone else. it's those core people, and there's not many of them, the core people whose opinion really does matter. Number 2, choose joy, and it speaks for itself. Number 3, gratitude and intention. An interesting thing she had in there was gratitude is an intention. You have to do it. You have to practice it, kind of like yoga. My wife loves yoga. You have to practice it. I find that when I practice it more, I'm a little bit more flexible, almost touch my toes. When I don't, I'm barely touching my knees. Number 4, practicing the F word. And she likes a good curse word, so I was all in ready for this one, but she meant forgiveness. There was a quote in there that I loved. It says, whether I forgive or don't forgive isn't going to affect whether justice is done. Forgiveness happens inside my skin. Number 5. Now there's a big word here. Do you know how to say that big word?
I do.
All right, let's hear it. I don't believe you. Let's hear it.
Collective effervescence.
Effervescence. Wow. I love that word. What does that mean?
I think it means being connected, if I'm not mistaken. Are you going to look it up live on the recording?
No. It means stay connected with your team. Absolutely. That's basically the gist of it. And the last one was lean in. We need you. So those are her 6 practices. Bottom hands only, choose joy, gratitude, practice the F word, collective
effervescence.
Effervescence. I'll get that word eventually. Lean in. We need you.
So final thoughts, we'll finish up here. I shared my kind of 3 things that you could take home tomorrow or use in the classroom tomorrow as a parent. I'm going to go through those just so you can finish off. 1 is make eye contact with every student every day and greet them. If you're a parent, also do this, right? Number 2 is check in to see whether the kids that you're working with, the adults that you're working with, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's a co-teacher, whatever it is, how their gas tank is, right? And you could use whatever analogy you wanted. Is it full? Is it halfway? Is it empty? Are they running on fumes? And the reason I say that is because I feel like if a kid walks through the door and you know he's running on fumes, you can expect the minimal amount required that day in class, or even pull them aside and say, hey, let's how do I get you to half empty? How do I get you to empty? What can I do to help? But if you don't even ask, you're never going to know. And that's when a lid will be flipped, is because you don't know where the student's coming from and they haven't had a chance to share that with you. And the last one, I think, is more importantly for those of us that work with kids in our own homes, is to spend 10 to 15 minutes of unstructured time with each of your children each day, no tech.
Okay. My 3, proximity, lid flipping kids, and culture of connection. If you've made it this far in the podcast, you know what those 3 things are.
Fantastic. We love you. We appreciate you. We are glad that you're here listening to the first ever episode of the Learnable Podcast. We have big plans for this, obviously, but so do millions of other podcasts out there that only end up with 8 or 9 episodes. We hope we are not one of those.
We won't be. And book. What's our next book?
Our next book is Think Again by Adam Grant.
Think Again.
It's pretty heavy.
It's so good.
Heavy.
It's
amazing.
No,
it's great. It's just heavy. There's a lot of stuff in there to practice, and having your mind rewire is really difficult. And so that's kind of what his whole book about, is rewiring your mind to look at things differently.
All right. We will see you all next week, where we talk about Think Again. And as always, don't forget to read a book.